What is up today, Dallas Cowboys fans, Cowboy Nation, football fans everywhere in general, actually. But obviously, if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, you remember Sunday night, the Dallas Cowboys were, in my opinion, I'm going to say, and I've said it multiple times, a must-win game for the Dallas Cowboys. Came in with a 3-3 record. You saw early on in that day, the Philadelphia Eagles pulling off a very comfortable win. You're talking about the Washington Commanders now pulling off a win again, pretty much on that Hail Mary variety, I guess you want to call it, against the Chicago Bears. So now both of those teams are sitting at the top of the NFC East with only 2 losses. The Dallas Cowboys are sitting there finding themselves in pretty much a battle at the bottom of the division with the New York Giants, which is where the Cowboys do not want to be. Because even though the Cowboys up and down, you never know what to expect during the postseason. Over the last recent years, obviously, the Dallas Cowboys have been in contention or competition with a team like the Philadelphia Eagles when it comes to who is going to be the NFC East division champion. But now the Dallas Cowboys with a loss, unfortunately, the final score, the Dallas Cowboys 24, the San Francisco 49ers 30. This was a game that brings the Cowboys now to a 3-4 record. A team like the San Francisco 49ers, who've had so many injuries, and again, the Cowboys on the flip side also have been dealing with some major injuries to some key pieces. You're talking about not having a Deron Bland out there, an All-Pro now level player, a Pro Bowl level player, a cornerback, opposite side of a Trayvon Diggs, who was returning from this, I guess you want to say the ACL injury that he that occurred last season, early on in the season. But obviously, we do know sometimes that's going to be an up and down type situation because you have to get comfortable again. The NFL is a much faster game than anything you can ever have ever seen, especially comparing it to the college game or anything like that. So it's going to take a little time to get comfortable, get back. I guess get your tires back up underneath you. And we know the talent that Trayvon Diggs is when he's healthy. But the Cowboys themselves, I've also thrown in the mix of a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence, a vocal leader, a guy that's going to go out there and show you how to get it done, and also get guys in the right position. But when we talk about the San Francisco 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys obviously have had so many issues with this team over the last recent years, and that trend, I guess you could say, will continue because you have players like a George Kittle who had well over 100 yards, a very comfortable game for him. You had Brock Purdy just making plays when he needed to. And then we know that system that Kyle Shanahan runs down there over there in San Francisco, and not having a guy like Christian McCaffrey who's now out for the season, they still have guys like Mason. You're still looking at having an Isaac Guerrero, who the Dallas Cowboys, I can talk about in a little bit, who I had so many high expectations for us being able to take a running back in this past draft, and he was one of them in the video I made during the offseason leading up to the NFL draft. So seeing the Cowboys not be able to take advantage of some opportunities, especially a game you probably shouldn't have even been in, because it was a game, I'm going to say the San Francisco 49ers more so than not dominated pretty much. So to me, the final score 24-30, obviously again the 49ers coming out with the win, it wasn't even as close to me as the final score may make you think a little bit if you didn't really watch the game, because it took some heroics, I guess you want to say. Dak Prescott, who got it rolling a little bit. CeeDee Lamb, who's pretty much has now shown himself, I believe, 13 catches, over 140 yards in this game, 2 touchdowns. Pretty much he's our only outside threat when you're talking about the receiving game, outside of a guy like Jake Ferguson, who I've talked about many times, have lots of love for because he plays hard. You know you're going to get that hustle. You know you're going to get that same intensity game in and game out. But the Cowboys just have so many flaws right now, and they cannot be covered up. We could talk about what some of the major issues are, and to me, that's going to start with the defensive side of the ball, led by a guy who I had high expectations for as a defensive play caller, and I guess you want to say the voice that he's been in this NFL for such a long time, in Mike Zimmer. But it starts to me with the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about that a little bit. If we talk about Mike Zimmer, I'm going to say right now, we can get into whose fault it is, why the defense hasn't looked physical, why the defense hasn't looked disciplined. And we're talking about a defense that has now given up 40 points multiple times this year against not the San Francisco 49ers, excuse me. You're talking about against a team like the New Orleans Saints, who when they came out earlier on in the season, lots of people were thinking this team could be very dangerous. The team could have some heart and force a lot of trouble for some other rosters around the league. But we see the Saints starting to wane off. I guess you want to say wane off a little bit from where that earlier season projection. And then you're talking about I guess you want to say the beating that the Dallas Cowboys took before going into the bye week at home against the Detroit Lions, a final score 47-9. So Mike Zimmer, to me, we can talk about some of the guys just not getting it done, but if we're talking about I guess you want to say a leader, and all the talk you're talking about from former coaches that coached with him, you're talking about from former players that played under him, all you heard was from the offseason, you heard Mike Zimmer is going to get every drop out of every player. If you're not the best player in the world, he's going to squeeze whatever you have. Apparently, these players must not have much in them at all, because you're talking about a defense that just plays with no physicality, lack of discipline, and it's shown itself more times than not. And I'm going to say we're obviously looking at a team now whose victories pretty much have come from a team, I guess you want to say, against the Cleveland Browns early in the season with the Deshaun Watson. We've seen the fall from grace that he's had over these last years in the NFL. And then you're talking about the Dallas Cowboys pulling off a win against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it wasn't even anything I would say was an impressive win. It was a nice win, I guess, when you're looking at where the Steelers were at that point and what they're kind of turning themselves into be a little bit. Mike Tomlin, he's going to have them ready to go. So that's a nice win, I guess you can call it. But then beating the New York Giants 20-15, it was nothing exciting. So the Cowboys now with 3 wins, I'm going to say they're not really convincing wins when you're looking at it. So there have been way more flaws than not. But again, talk about the defensive tackle position. That is where the interior of your defense is always going to begin. If you're not able to get a push there or hold even guys into right position to open up some holes for your pass rushers and your linebackers behind, you're not going to do anything in the NFL, because one thing you will force yourselves to do is now be off balance plenty of times, because you see teams just running down our throat many times and out. Like I said, a guy like Isaac Guerrero, who was breaking off nice runs. A Mason Jr., again, this is some of the key pieces for the 49ers offensive game, and they haven't even really gotten rolling this season due to some injuries themselves. But the Cowboys, if you're having some trouble, play against the Dallas Cowboys. You're going to find your way at some point. And then we're talking about, again, the defensive tackle position outside of an Osa Odigizua, who to me, you can't really call him a disappointment this year, because I'm going to say there's not anything outside of him, especially when you're talking about taking away a Micah Parsons and taking away a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence. You had a Chauncey Golston, who, again, had a solid game, I will say, against the 49ers, but nothing, obviously, any splash plays, because that's not the type of player that he is. And then, obviously, it doesn't matter what you believe. We're talking about a former first-round pick, again, from a couple years ago in Mozzie Smith. The jokes continue to go on. I remember Sunday night, there's a visual on the screen. You see what now? Again, we could talk about what your belief system is, your belief, I guess, in the system that is PFF, whether you believe in their ratings or not. At some point, I don't care what it is. Mozzie Smith, there's a visual on the screen, and kind of jokes have been flying the last couple days, that Mozzie Smith is rated 119 out of 119 players at his position. I don't care what your belief is in that system, or that rating system, I guess you'll call it, for PFF. At some point, if you're dead last in anything, you're probably not having the best of goals out there. And to me, he's not even middle of the pack, because one thing you've seen from Mozzie Smith is so much inconsistency. You'll see some flash plays here and there. You'll see a guy that can kind of hold his own, especially coming into this league and coming out of the draft. All you heard was how strong he is, how physical he is, and he talks about how much he just wants to hit people. That's all he wants to do. We haven't seen it as a Dallas Cowboys fan, and that's the most disappointing thing, because this fan base just wants to win. I don't care if you're on the pessimistic side of the ball, I guess you want to say the side of the fan base, or if you're on the optimistic side, or you just somewhere fair weather fans. The team's playing well, you're right there with them. If you're not, you're somewhere off the grid as well. At the end of the day, we all want to see this team win. We all want to see some success. But so not continuing what Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones have shown us year in, year after year, they do not care about free agency. They won't really throw anything at that if they don't feel they need to, which is more times than not. They don't really focus on trade markets outside of being forced to. When we talk about years ago in I guess you want to say in the March, I guess you want to say the competition, where we're looking for a receiver, you're looking at a guy like Amari Cooper. You're looking at some things we got from maybe a Stephon Gilmore. This is a situation where the Cowboys have not really thrown anything outside of guys who are possibly just retreads, or guys that used to be good, former All-Pro players, former Pro Bowl level players. The Cowboys have shown, Jerry Jones, I will say consistently, Stephen Jones especially, the front office, those two guys leading it all, have shown they do not care about trying to make this team one of those super competitive teams. Because one thing I don't want to hear anymore is the disappointment. And all of a sudden we hear Stephen Jones always talk about there's not any cap room. Then you hear Jerry Jones echoing the same nonsense. You've seen teams like the Chiefs. You've seen some actual competitive teams. The Philadelphia Eagles comes to mind. They had no issue. We know the contracts they gave a guy like Jalen Hurts, and you're looking at Devontae Smith, these extensions, and looking at what A.J. Brown got from the Philadelphia Eagles. They took no time bringing in a guy like Saquon Barkley from the New York Giants, because they have never been scared to try to make an extra move to really get that train rolling over there. We, at some point, have got to accept the fact that's just not the way Jerry and Steven will do things. They don't really care about pushing the tempo, and I guess you want to say throwing all caution to the wind and trying to make this a real championship contender. They're going to say they believe in these guys, but at the end of the day, the guys that are on this roster are not getting it done. The number one thing I will say, especially, we're talking about disappointing players. Look at a guy like Donovan Wilson. The last couple years, this is definitely a guy who starts to fall out of fans' graces. We're talking about, because again, a couple years ago, you're looking at a Donovan Wilson as, especially at the safety position, or that higher player, a guy you know for sure he's a fan favorite, because he's going to come out there, play hard, hard. He's going to hit when he has the opportunity, and he's just going to lay it all out there. You've seen so many lackadaisical moments. I'm not going to blame it on the extension that he got, the contract extension, but there has definitely been a drop off in the intensity and just the player that we saw. Sunday night, I guess you would call it. When you're looking at exactly what a Donovan Wilson was on that field, pretty much, if you saw the ball in his direction, it was probably a completion, and it was probably a big play for the 49ers. George Kittle many times did not. And this is just something that's going to continue because again, I'm definitely on the pessimistic side. I can kind of get into conversations. I've always kind of said, okay, let this thing get settled a little bit. When you start throwing in new pieces, new coaches, you have to let it develop a little bit. But at some point, it's starting to feel like we're just running into a brick wall because we see the same things. The coaches will come out and say, we're going to play better. We're going to be more physical. We're going to hold ourselves accountable. And you failing to see it. We can get into Mike McCarthy, which I have lots of disdain for him as a coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Not of him as a guy or anything like that. But we're talking about, do I believe in the system and the belief system that he's kind of in, I guess you want to say bringing in the culture. We can get into all of a sudden, yes, we've had 12-win seasons. We've gone into that situation. But at the end of the day, we see there is no postseason success. And you hear all the time, there's been such a lack of discipline over these years. At some point, when you're looking at a Mike Zimmer, you're looking at a Mike McCarthy, the blame can definitely go to the coaches as well as the players. So let's not be just content on just putting it all on players alone, because at some point you have got to put the right guys in position and you have got to adjust to what you have on your roster. I don't care what you came into the season think you're going to have. At some point, if you feel like you really just don't have it, or we're just not getting it done from that standpoint, change things up. You at no point, I will be less upset with a coaching staff for trying to do something different and it doesn't work than just watching us continue to do the same things over and over, knowing it's not going to work. So at some point, then when you're looking at kind of the situation as I talked about, just the mentality that Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones have brought to this franchise in general, where it's just okay to be here more times than not. Looking at a guy like Trayvon Diggs, we're talking about a reporter, the sports reporter from WFAA, Mike Leslie. The number one issue I had with the Trayvon Diggs, it wasn't this specific play at all, because football is one of those things. Everything's happening so fast, you're having to make split decisions. But at some point, why exactly are you losing a devastating game 24-30 to a rival team again that you've had no success against in recent years? And again, a game that I call myself and many other people were calling a must-win game. And the first thing you saw Trayvon Diggs do after the game in the hallway, coming out still in shoulder pads, uniform, jersey, and he's upset with a sports reporter talking about what was Trayvon Diggs doing. Whether you call it Twitter, X, a tweet, a post, whatever it is, he posts on X or Twitter, whatever it is, like I said, that he was pretty much asking the question, what exactly was Trayvon Diggs doing on this specific play? Again, Donovan Wilson in coverage, George Kittle coming off with a big play, running downfield. Trayvon Diggs, you can kind of tell he might have been trying to, maybe the mindset of, if I try to run through this blocker, because George Kittle did have a few blockers out there with him, some Cowboys defenders also in pursuit, along with Trayvon Diggs. Trayvon Diggs could have been thinking, maybe if I try to blow through this block and just make this tackle, if I miss it, George Kittle could find himself in the end zone with no hesitation at all. So it looked like to me, personally, just making a split decision that he's just trying to, okay, keep the same angle, so at least I'm going to make George Kittle have to make a decision. He's not going to just easily walk into the end zone, running down the sideline. But after the game, so Mike Leslie's asking, where is his intensity? Where's his hustle on this play? Trayvon Diggs is pretty much telling him, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know football. You can't go out there and do what I do, which is all that can be very true. At the same time, why is that your focus? We just lost another game. Your team is now sitting at 3-4. You should be in the locker room, not on Twitter, not on X, trying to figure out who's talking noise about the team and the players. Get this thing corrected. But to me, I love Trayvon Diggs as a player. I'm not even knocking him, and I'm still going to give him a little bit of time to get his body underneath him, because it's still going to take, it's a work in progress. We know the all-pro level player he's been since he stepped into this league. The ball hawk he's been in this league. A Pro Bowl, perennial Pro Bowl level type player he's been. And coming back from an ACL injury is not easy. But the focus and the culture that this team has built is literally starting to leak down into the players, and it's been kind of been talked about obviously year after year. But just seeing that was like very disappointing, because the number one thing you're going to ask yourself is, can they correct this thing? This is exactly why I don't feel we're going to correct it eventually in the long run of this season, because this is where the players are. The focus is not where it needs to be, and to me, that's why I feel like you're talking about Mike Zimmer, a guy like Mike McCarthy as your head coach, who also wants to be your offensive play caller. They're starting to lose the message, and they're losing the team, and now players are just going rogue. Already you're having a deficit, because you're not having a Micah Parsons and a Deron Bland and DeMarcus Lawrence out there. So you need everybody to step up. But at least don't be out here trying to fight with reporters and talk about what reporters are posting on social media, when the focus should be on how exactly do we correct this thing, especially after another devastating loss. Then the number one thing, going to the offensive side of the ball, obviously the up and down talks, and I'm going to say I don't have any issue with anybody criticizing the contract Dak Prescott got, because whether you believe he got it, he earned it or not, which again, I don't care, because at some point we can already go into the conversation of saying every quarterback at this point now, it seems, is going to reset the market. Every new quarterback that gets a contract is probably going to be up there trying to make the new highest paid contract in NFL history, which Dak Prescott just did. But when you're making $60 million a year as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys especially, you're going to get lots of criticism. People are going to hold you accountable if they don't feel you're playing well, especially when you just came out yourself and said you haven't been playing well prior to the game. This is going to be now where you're asking Dak Prescott, what more can you do? You have to do more. We saw sometimes in this game, Dak Prescott, and I always call him Dak balls. You see Dak, when he starts to lose his feet, when he starts to try to force the issue, and he forces a deep ball downfield to Kevontae Turpin, about 5'6", 5'7" in height, which obviously that's going to be an issue. We talk about another one that happened late in the game when the Cowboys are almost on their way to making a major comeback potentially. Another ball to Kevontae Turpin. That is not a ball you should be throwing. At some point, sometimes, and obviously you can get into maybe it looked better because it ended up being more of a punt situation, but these are just some issues that we're seeing because when you're talking about the front office who care nothing about bringing in an opposite weapon, I guess you want to say a weapon opposite of a CeeDee Lamb, because you do know teams are going to continue to focus on him. We're talking about CeeDee Lamb, who had 13 catches for over 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, some of them later in the game to help get this thing back a little bit closer. And again, a Jake Ferguson, a guy who I have lots of confidence in if he's being able to use right, which I still don't feel like we're always even using him and putting him in the right positions. But Dak Prescott cannot force the issue. Sometimes it's going to be best to live for another day. And again, we were talking about a second interception from Dak Prescott, just trying to force the ball down the sideline. And what happens, just throws it right to the defender, makes a play on the ball, and the Cowboys are giving up the ball in their own territory. San Francisco 49ers pretty much are able to kind of really grab control of this game at this point. So we're just going to continue to get into some of the issues because it all at some point leads back to Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, his front office, and what Mike McCarthy is not bringing as a play caller, but more so as the head coach of this team. You are in charge of creating the culture. You're in charge of building this culture. And if you're not doing that, then there's no reason for you to be here, especially if you're going to be the offensive play caller. Because the number one thing we've seen, we can get into the offensive line, to me, is obviously one of the biggest issues. And I'm going to say more than Dak Prescott, in my opinion. Because if you don't have an offensive line that can hold up, which obviously we can go into starting with Terrence Steele, who got that contract extension, and I've been over the last couple years, I've been out on Terrence Steele. I have no confidence in him. If he plays well, I'll clap it up for him, but I'm not really putting any stock into him because I don't think it's anything that's going to be consistent. I feel like he played over his head and he got that contract extension, and now obviously we're talking about the injury that he did suffer. He has never returned, and I don't feel like he's going to return. He is what he is, and we're going to have to accept it until it's time to just fully move on as a fan base, because the front office is obviously going to take that time on doing that. Zach Martin, I cannot criticize him too much because with age comes attrition, and you are now finally seeing the all-pro level player, the first ballot Hall of Famer, the perennial Pro Bowler that he has been in his career. Again, first ballot Hall of Famer. Zach Martin gets nothing but love and credit from me for what he has brought to this team. So many years were just wasted with him, but you're looking at a guy that's towards the end of his career. He's not what he used to be, and again, that comes with time. Father Time is undefeated. And then you're talking about going on the other side, obviously opposite of a Tyler Smith, and then you're looking at Cooper Beebe, who I have lots of love for as a rookie, who has played his heart out in my personal opinion, and Tyler Smith, just the hard-working player that he is and the development he's shown. You're talking about a rookie left tackle in Tyler Guyton, and when you're talking about a defensive, I'm just going to say an offensive line weakness on opposite sides of a right tackle position, obviously you're going to see some of these teams, and we do know the fear, I guess you want to say the fearsome Nick Bosa that the San Francisco 49ers have, the beast that he is, the monster he is. You're now starting to see teams test out a Terrence Steele, test out a guy like Tyler Guyton a little bit, the left tackle first round we got out of Oklahoma, because he is so young. You know he's still learning on the fly, and teams are starting to put pressure on him a little bit, and that's obviously not going to help your quarterback when it comes to force pressure on the outside edges. But when you're talking about the Dallas Cowboys going on that offensive line, the running game is the biggest weakness for this team, because what it forces the Cowboys to do when you don't have an opposite threat of a guy like outside of CeeDee Lamb and possibly talking about a Jake Ferguson in the passing game, you're going to have to be able to have some kind of balance to keep defenses honest. We don't have that, because we can go into it again really quickly about Derrick Henry having interest in the Cowboys coming into the offseason, going into the offseason, and him talking about the Cowboys didn't even give a call. And then Jerry Jones, as always, Stephen Jones selling more nonsense as they always do, do, coming out pretty much saying we didn't have the money, which we know is completely false because contracts get moved around, restructured, changed all the time, especially if you're talking about you just paid a guy like Dak Prescott, who you feel should be the face of your franchise as the quarterback. You're talking about a CeeDee Lamb you just paid who's making over 32, 33 mil a year now. You're talking about a guy potentially, okay, well, we're going to have to pay Micah Parsons in the future. We just paid Trayvon Diggs. You've seen, like I talked about, some of these real contending teams, they don't let anything like a contract, especially for guys that you feel like are going to be here for a few years, to move some money around a little bit, move those contracts around a little bit, because they're going to be here anyway, and try to improve your roster. Not focusing on the running back position in the offseason and free agency, and especially not doing it with all the multiple guys that you could have taken in the NFL draft at the running back position. And I made a video in the offseason, going into the NFL draft, talking about all the potential guys the Cowboys should be taking a look at. And we came away with none of them. Not because we didn't have the chance to get a lot of them, because we chose to not take them. And that's exactly why you find the Cowboys having no offensive game, because we cannot be consistent in a running game. The interior is getting no push inside, and that's going to force issues when you're talking about, obviously, all the love we have, talking about a multi-time league-leading rusher in Ezekiel Elliott, a guy who's on track to go over 10,000 yards rushing in his NFL career, which means he's no slouch and he's made many plays. But Zeke, at this point in his career, I'm not on the side of calling him washed, because I feel like he has a role. He should be more of your goal line guy, getting those hard-nosed runs and those yardage that we need. He should not be a guy you're counting on to get more than about 8 to 10 carries a game. Because to me, I feel like even 12 is pushing it. Because he has a role. Let's be clear. He's still not done in this league. But we should be on a more of a pace, as we kind of were with a Tony Pollard, letting him get more of the game and then kind of finding spots for Zeke Elliott, because that's where he's more dominant. One thing you know, when you get inside that 5 to 10 yard line, Ezekiel Elliott is going to find the end zone. That's what he does. That's how the Cowboys should be utilizing him. But we have failed to do that. I've talked many times about how the love I have for a guy like Rico Dowdle, his running style. Now, the production has not matched it overall. I believe having a little over 200 yards, who he somehow came up with an illness prior to the game, which I'm not sure how serious that was, because now he said, I believe it was the day after. Yesterday, I think it came out and said if he had to play today, he would. But then you're going into that situation and you're asking, why exactly did you even bring on a guy to the practice squad as a Dalvin Cook, a former perennial, again, Pro Bowl player, which the Cowboys love, guys that used to be all pros, guys that used to be Pro Bowlers, because they're cheap. It's low risk, possible high reward, and we have not seen much high reward from a lot of these guys. But they finally find him some time to play in this game. And again, we were not able to see anything because his offensive line is the biggest weakness. We have no run game, we have no balance, and as long as that continues, we're not going to have anything that we can say is a feasible, consistent game plan. Because now we're talking about forcing the ball down low. I mean, I guess you want to say down the field to guys that are not consistent NFL wide receivers. Why is 5'7" Cavante Turpin getting deep balls when all of a sudden the Cowboys find themselves back in the mix of this game somehow, down 24-30 with more than 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and you see 4 incomplete passes, and the last one, especially down the field, down the sideline, which I will give Dak Prescott a lot of credit for. It was a perfect ball. But you're talking about the Cowboys not caring and valuing bringing in actual pass catchers to be threats. And you see Cavante Turpin, not used to making that play down the sideline, drops the ball. Pretty much game is over at that point, and the Cowboys find themselves with a 3-4 record. That's where we are, and I'm putting a lot of this on Mike McCarthy, because again, you are the guy that comes out every single week and says, we're going to be disciplined, we're going to play better, we're going to do this, and we have not seen it. It's Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, Mike McCarthy. This is where it all starts. You can give some blame to Mike Zimmer. You can give some guys, obviously you're going to give lots of blame to the players that are actually having to execute the plays as well. But this, to me, is coming from the coaching staff and the front office, not valuing what needs to be valued, and just being lazy when it comes to actually making adjustments and trying to improve this roster overall, because this roster has many flaws, and that goes without saying. So to sum all that up, pretty much, I'm on the side where I'm ready to move on from Mike McCarthy. We can get into, okay, we can play better, we can get better, just wait a little bit longer. Let's see if some of these adjustments can be made. And let's be clear, I'm very happy with being wrong. I'm sure every fan right now that's on the pessimistic side is very happy with being wrong potentially, because I would love nothing more than the Cowboys to turn this thing around, get much better, because we can obviously have something to be happy about and proud of, being able to be able to support week in and week out. But I do not see it coming, and if it does, let's be clear, the postseason's still around the corner. The Cowboys at themselves, it's a long season, let's be clear. You still have a chance to get yourself back in the mix, because you haven't faced the Eagles even one time yet, so you have 2 games against them. You haven't faced the Commanders. You're going to face them 2 times. You get to face the Giants again. You can get yourself back in this mix, but if you don't do anything differently, we're going to see some of the same results. You're going to see a solid team against some of the weaker opponents, opponents. You might see a solid team, a solid performance against some good opponents, but it's not going to be anything that we can count on every single week. So to me, I'm ready to move away from a guy like Mike McCarthy. It's about time to start finding some changes, some new voices. Stop bringing in retreads. Stop bringing in old coaches. Mike McCarthy is sitting here in 2024 running an 07-08 offense. No creativity, is very little motion. You're not seeing anything that's even forcing the hand of a defense, making them even get back on their heels a little bit. It's the same stuff you see every single week. That's why teams pretty much just sit on our pass plays, and Dak Prescott is having to run around and make special plays, sometimes out of what's not even there. Dak Prescott has not played well. Let's be clear. I'm not going to give him any credit for having to run around, because at the end of the day, we know what the situation is. You can't put the ball in harm's way. At some point, you can talk about what you wouldn't be happy with, throwaways or anything like that. I would be much happier than that, than giving other teams short fields because we're turning the ball over relentlessly, which he has done this year. I believe we're already sitting here with a 10 touchdown, 8 interception ratio. This is not good football this team is playing. It's not consistent ball, and it starts with your head coach when it comes to discipline and so many other issues. And obviously, we can talk about, to me, at some point, it feels like we're talking about Brandon Aubrey, our kicker, being the best player on this team at this point, or the most consistent so far. We have got to get better. We've got to improve. But if I'm being honest, I don't see any of that happening with a guy like Mike McCarthy. It is what it is. This is one of those situations Cowboys fans are going to have to ask themselves, what can we do to put any pressure on Jerry and Stephen Jones? Because we've seen many times they don't care. As long as the Cowboys are good enough to be in the mix, be able to be talked about, they're cool enough with that. We're always going to be on television. We're always going to have prime time games and live national games. The Cowboys have turned into one of those situations where you're very popular, but the product doesn't match what the brand and the name is overall. So at some point, we're going to have to ask ourselves, what exactly can we do? Because things are just not going the way they should, and it's been that way for such a long time at this point. The Cowboys now will be facing off with the Atlanta Falcons next Sunday, and I'm going to say a surprising team because we didn't really know what to expect, but we know the threat that they have now. Kirk Cousins, who's kind of being more of a stable quarterback, and he's very much so a starting quarterback in this league, and that's always dangerous. A guy that you give some weapons and he's able to utilize them is very dangerous. Obviously, I'm a Texas Longhorns fan, so you're looking and saying a guy like Bijan Robinson, we know the dangerous threat that he is just consistently. We know they have a Drake London out there. We know exactly what we're talking about when Kyle Pitts, who I believe had a big game, 2 touchdowns in that last game. This is going to be something the Cowboys have to come out here ready. 12 o'clock p.m. Central, you're going to have to come in here ready on Sunday, because if you're not, and you're on the road, let's be clear, you're in Atlanta, so that fan base is going to be very loud. Everybody wants to stick it to the Cowboys, especially when this team is down. You're going to want to make it even worse. So the Atlanta Falcons will come out there ready. If the Cowboys don't, it's going to be another loss, and we're going to be talking about who needs to be fired, and we're going to be loading up those mock drafts as soon as Monday morning. So the Cowboys have got to come out here ready to go. I'm not going to say, obviously, I'm not rooting against them, but I don't see it happening. But if we can correct this thing, somewhat is going to have to start against a team such as the Atlanta Falcons, who have now starting to believe in themselves sitting here with a 5-3 record. So come out here ready to go. Obviously, we're going to be here to talk about what happens again in the next game. I appreciate you guys for all the support. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and share. You guys are amazing. Keep passing the word around, and let me know down below in the comment section, do you believe this team can turn anything around? Do you believe anything can change? Again, I'm very pessimistic right now. I'm usually somewhere in neutral, I guess you want to say, optimistic, more in the middle. Right now, I'm very pessimistic on what this product is. But if you believe we can change some things, let me know. Turn this thing around. If you don't feel like we can change anything around, just like I am right now, let me know down below in the comment section. I appreciate it. So, as always, I appreciate you guys for the support, and enjoy the rest of your day.